In Pine Hollow, peace was shattered when Jack Monroe's gang arrived, demanding money under threats. John Hargrove, a war veteran, couldn't stand by and watch. Though weakened by age, he chose to act. With his loyal dog Rex and the townsfolk, he devised a plan. What followed was a resistance no one expected. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Hollow's main street as John Hargrove stepped onto his worn wooden porch, his faithful German shepherd Rex padding silently beside him. The crisp Montana air carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, a familiar comfort that had drawn him to this peaceful mountain town years ago. At 74, John's tall frame still commanded respect, though his movements had grown more deliberate with age. His weathered face told stories of battles fought and wisdom earned, while his sharp eyes retained the alertness of his military days. This morning, however, something felt different. The usual warmth of greetings from passing neighbors had been replaced by hurried waves and downcast eyes. The transformation had begun 3 days ago when a group of outsiders arrived in their black SUVs, led by Jack Monroe, a man whose reputation had preceded him in whispered conversations at the local diner. John watched as Mrs. Thompson swept broken glass from the sidewalk in front of her bakery, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by quiet determination. The sight stirred something deep within him, memories of other times, other places where he had witnessed the shadow of fear creeping across communities. He had sworn never to stand idle again. "Come on, Rex," he murmured, descending the porch steps with measured grace. The German shepherd's ears perked forward, his powerful body alert but calm, mirroring his master's composure. Together, they made their way down Main Street, acknowledging the subtle nods from shopkeepers who peered out from behind partially drawn blinds. The town's atmosphere had shifted dramatically since Monroe and his men had established themselves at the Pine Valley Inn, the only hotel in town. Their presence was like a dark cloud hanging over the community, suffocating the very essence of what made Pine Hollow special. John had spent years building a life here, finding peace in the simplicity of small-town living, but now he could feel that peace slipping away. As they passed Thompson's bakery, Sarah Thompson looked up from her sweeping. Her eyes met John's, and he saw not just fear but a quiet plea for help. He paused, Rex sitting attentively at his side. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the steady assurance that had once commanded troops. "Quite a mess they left." Sarah's hands tightened on the broom handle. "John, I don't know what to do. They're coming back today for an answer about their protection fee." The last words came out bitter and scared. John nodded slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. "Come by the community center at noon. Bring anyone else who's willing. It's time we had a talk about protecting our own." If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering across her features. "You think we can stand up to them? They're dangerous, John." "So was every threat I've faced," he replied quietly. "The difference is in how we prepare and stand together." He gestured to Rex, who sat alert and proud beside him. "Even old soldiers like us still have some fight left in us, don't we, boy?" Rex's tail thumped once against the wooden sidewalk, his intelligent eyes fixed on his master. Sarah managed a small smile, the first John had seen in days. As they continued their walk, John's mind drifted back to his military days. He had learned then that victory didn't always require superior strength or numbers. Sometimes it came down to strategy, preparation, and the unwavering unity of people fighting for something they believed in. Pine Hollow was worth fighting for. The community center stood at the edge of town, a modest building that had served as the heart of Pine Hollow's social life for generations. John had spent countless hours here, sharing stories with fellow veterans, teaching self-defense classes to eager teenagers, and helping organize town events. Now, it would serve a different purpose. Inside, he found Billy Chun, the center's young caretaker, arranging chairs for the senior yoga class that would never happen today. The boy's usually cheerful face was drawn with worry. "Billy," John called out, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "We're going to need the space at noon. Spread the word, quietly. Anyone who wants to protect our town should be here." Billy's eyes lit up with understanding. "Yes, sir. I'll let people know." He hesitated, then added, "My grandfather. He always said you were more than just a soldier. Said you were a strategist." John's lips curved in a slight smile. Your grandfather gave me too much credit. But today, we'll need every bit of wisdom we can gather." He moved to the center's windows, looking out at the town he had grown to love. "We're not going to match their aggression, Billy. We're going to outsmart it." Throughout the morning, John and Rex patrolled the town's perimeter, noting vantage points, escape routes, and potential safe houses. His military training kicked in automatically, analyzing terrain and identifying strategic positions. But this wasn't a military operation. It was about protecting homes, families, and the peaceful way of life that Pine Hollow represented. As noon approached, people began arriving at the community center in ones and twos, trying to appear casual while their hearts raced with anticipation. John watched from the window as Sarah Thompson arrived with 3 other shopkeepers. Then came the Henderson family from the hardware store, followed by Tom Wilson, the town's veteran mechanic. Each person who walked through the door carried the weight of fear, but also a spark of hope. Rex sat by the door, greeting each arrival with a gentle wag of his tail, his presence somehow both reassuring and protective. John had trained him well over the years, and the dog's instincts were as sharp as ever. If anyone approached with ill intent, Rex would know. By 12:15, the community center held nearly 30 people, a significant portion of Pine Hollow's adult population. They sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle, their faces turned expectantly toward John. The room hummed with nervous energy and whispered conversations. John stood before them, his posture straight despite his years. Rex moved to sit beside him, a silent guardian. The room fell quiet, waiting for words that would chart their course through the troubled waters ahead. "I see fear in this room," John began, his voice carrying to every corner. "Fear is natural. It's human. But fear can either paralyze us or push us to act. Today we choose to act." He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "Pine Hollow is our home. We've built our lives here, raised our children here, created something beautiful here. No one has the right to take that from us through intimidation and threats." Sarah Thompson spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "But what can we do? They're stronger than us, and they're willing to use violence." John nodded, acknowledging her concern. "Physical strength isn't everything, Sarah. I learned that in my years of service. Sometimes, the smartest strategy is to use an opponent's strength against them. They expect us to be afraid, to be divided. We'll show them unity instead." He moved to a large map of Pine Hollow that hung on the wall, one usually used for planning festival layouts and parade routes. Now it would serve a different purpose. This town has advantages they don't know about. We know every trail, every shortcut, every hidden path. We have something worth protecting, and that makes us stronger than any outside force. As John began outlining his strategy, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. Fear gave way to determination, helplessness to purpose. The people of Pine Hollow were beginning to see their town through new eyes, not as victims, but as defenders of their way of life. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. No violence, no direct confrontation, but a coordinated effort to make Pine Hollow an unwelcoming place for those who meant harm. John assigned roles based on each person's strengths and knowledge of the town. The Henderson family would coordinate communications through their hardware store's radio network. Tom Wilson's garage would serve as a gathering point and command center. Every business would have a signal system and evacuation plan. As the meeting progressed, John could see the change in people's faces. They were standing straighter, speaking more confidently. The spark of hope was growing into a flame of determination. "Remember," John concluded, "our strength lies in our unity and our knowledge of this land. We're not fighting with fists or weapons. We're fighting with wisdom, preparation, and the power of community." As the meeting dispersed, people left in the same careful manner they had arrived, but with a new purpose in their steps. John remained behind with Rex, studying the map and making mental notes of potential scenarios. The real test would come soon enough. Sarah Thompson was the last to leave. She paused at the door, looking back at John. "Thank you," she said simply, "for reminding us that we're stronger than we thought." John nodded, a gentle smile crossing his weathered features. "We all have strength within us, Sarah. Sometimes we just need someone to help us find it." As the door closed behind her, John turned to Rex. "Well, old friend, looks like we've got our work cut out for us." The German shepherd's tail wagged once, his eyes fixed loyally on his master's face. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the community center's windows as John continued his planning. Outside, Pine Hollow was beginning to stir with a new energy, the quiet but powerful energy of a community preparing to stand together against those who would threaten their peace. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, both literally and figuratively. But for the first time in days, the people of Pine Hollow felt ready to face whatever came their way. Under the guidance of their quiet guardian, they had found their courage and their purpose. The real test was yet to come, but the seeds of resistance had been planted. In the days ahead, Pine Hollow would show that true strength comes not from intimidation and force, but from the unbreakable bonds of a community united in purpose and resolve. The morning after the community center meeting dawned gray and foreboding. Dark clouds rolled over the Montana mountains, bringing with them the promise of an early autumn storm. John Hargrove stood at his kitchen window, sipping black coffee from a well-worn Marine Corps mug, watching as the wind began to stir the pine trees surrounding his property. Rex lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to track movement outside. The phone lines had been busy all night as the townspeople implemented the first phase of their plan. The Henderson's hardware store had distributed two-way radios to key locations throughout Pine Hollow, disguised as routine business deliveries. Tom Wilson's mechanics had strategically parked several broken-down vehicles around town, creating choke points that could be used to control access to certain areas if needed. Sarah Thompson's bakery was already open, the broken windows now covered with cheerful paintings created by the local school children, a show of community spirit that masked the newly installed emergency signal system beneath the colorful artwork. Every business along Main Street had similar modifications, invisible to outsiders but creating a network of communication and safety throughout the town. John finished his coffee just as his secure radio crackled to life. It was Billy Chun from the community center. "Mr. Hargrove, they're on the move. 3 vehicles just left the Pine Valley Inn." "Acknowledged," John responded, his voice steady. "Implement Protocol Alpha. Keep me informed." He turned to Rex, who was already standing alert. "Time to go to work, old friend." As they stepped onto the porch, the wind had picked up considerably. Perfect weather for what they had planned. The storm would provide cover for their movements and help mask their preparations. John had learned long ago that nature could be either an adversary or an ally. It all depended on how you used it. Making their way into town, John and Rex observed the subtle signs of preparation that would be invisible to outsiders. Mrs. Henderson was rearranging her hardware display, ensuring the emergency supplies were easily accessible. The local teenagers, usually glued to their phones, were now positioned at strategic points throughout town, appearing to lounge casually while serving as lookouts. At the diner, Emma Watson, the owner's daughter, was setting up the morning coffee service on the patio, an unusual choice given the threatening weather, but one that gave her a clear view of the street. As John passed, she gave an almost imperceptible nod. 3 quick blinks of her table lantern confirmed that Monroe's men had been spotted heading toward the south end of town. The town's transformation over the past 24 hours was remarkable. Fear still existed, but it had been channeled into purposeful action. Every resident had a role to play, from the elementary school teachers who had developed emergency protocols for their students, to the retired postman who now coordinated a network of senior citizens monitoring town activities from their homes. John made his way to Tom Wilson's garage, their designated command center. The mechanic shop was perfect for their needs: multiple exits, clear views of the main approaches to town, and a legitimate reason for people to come and go throughout the day. Tom had converted his office into a coordination point, with maps and communication equipment hidden behind innocent-looking automotive posters. "Morning, John," Tom greeted him, his voice low but firm. "Weather's turning nasty." "Good," John replied, studying the town map they had marked with key positions. "Status report." Tom pointed to various locations on the map. "Henderson's team is in position. Sarah's got the downtown network ready. Billy's got the community center secured as our fallback point. Weather forecast says the storm will hit full force in about 3 hours." John nodded, his military training automatically calculating variables and contingencies. "And our guests?" "Heading to the south side first. Looks like they're starting with the residential areas today." Tom's face darkened with concern. "Lots of families down there, John." "They're ready," John assured him. "Everyone knows their part." He turned to Rex, who sat alertly by the door. "Keep our friends company, boy. You know what to do." Rex trotted out silently, his powerful form disappearing into the increasing gloom of the stormy morning. The German Shepherd had his own mission, monitoring Monroe's men from a distance, providing early warning through a network of signals that John had spent years perfecting. The radio crackled again. "Mr. Hargrove." It was Sarah Thompson's voice. They just passed the bakery. 3 men in the lead car, 2 each in the others. They're carrying something." "Understood," John replied. "Implement Phase 2. Remember, calm and coordinated." Throughout Pine Hollow, subtle changes began to take place. Shop owners casually moved their closed signs into position. Residents began their practiced routines of securing homes and businesses. The teenagers playing basketball in the park picked up their game and moved it to the community center court, maintaining their watch while relocating to safer ground. John stood at Tom's garage window, watching as dark clouds continued to gather. The wind had picked up significantly, causing the trees to sway and creating an eerie whistling through the town's streets. Nature itself seemed to be aligning with their plans, providing cover and confusion for what was to come. A series of quick radio clicks indicated that Monroe's convoy had reached Cedar Street, the main residential area on the south side. John could picture the scene: 3 black SUVs rolling slowly down the peaceful street, their occupants expecting to find easy targets among the family homes and small gardens. What they didn't know was that every house on Cedar Street was now part of an intricate network of surveillance and support. Behind drawn curtains, residents watched and reported. Through backyard fences, children had already been quietly evacuated to safe houses. The entire street was prepared for what was coming. The storm's first heavy drops began to fall as John received word that Monroe's men had stopped at the Peterson house. Martha Peterson, a retired schoolteacher, lived alone, apparently an easy target. But Martha was far from helpless. As one of their key strategists, she had helped design the residential response plan. Through the radio, John heard the calm, practiced sequence of events unfold. Martha's wind chimes, the signal for her neighbors to begin their coordinated response. The sudden activation of several lawn sprinklers, seemingly triggered by the weather system but actually part of their defensive plan. The accidental power fluctuation that affected just that section of the street. From his position at the garage, John could see the growing frustration of Monroe's men as they faced not resistance, but simple, maddening obstacles. Every attempt to approach a house was met with some natural-seeming interruption. The strengthening storm added to their difficulties, making it hard to maintain their intimidating presence while battling the elements. Tom handed John a fresh cup of coffee, his weathered face showing a hint of satisfaction. "Phase 2 seems to be working." "So far," John agreed, his eyes never leaving the street. "But this is just the beginning. Monroe's not the type to give up easily. He'll try to adapt, change tactics." As if on cue, the radio crackled with Billy Chen's voice. "They're splitting up. 2 vehicles heading back toward Main Street, one staying on Cedar." John nodded. It was exactly what he had expected. "Implement Phase 3, he ordered calmly. "All units acknowledge." A series of clicks came through the radio as each sector of town confirmed their readiness. Phase 3 was more complex, designed to gradually constrict Monroe's ability to operate effectively while maintaining the appearance of normal small-town life disrupted only by bad weather. The storm was their ally now, its intensity growing with each passing minute. The wind drove sheets of rain across the streets, reducing visibility and making communication difficult for anyone without their coordinated radio network. Thunder rolled across the valley, providing cover for the movement of people and resources throughout the town. John watched as one of Monroe's SUVs passed the garage, its wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Through the rain-streaked windows, he could see the frustration on the faces of the occupants. They had come expecting to find a weak, unorganized community. Instead, they were facing an invisible resistance that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. A subtle motion caught his eye: Rex, moving through the shadows between buildings, tracking the vehicles while remaining unseen. The German Shepherd's training was evident in every calculated movement, providing crucial intelligence. See without ever revealing his purpose. Sarah's voice came through the radio again, calm but urgent. "They're approaching the bakery." 4 men, looking agitated. "Hold position," John replied. "Remember your training. No direct confrontation." The bakery had been transformed into one of their strongest positions, though none of Monroe's men would realize it. Every approach was covered by cameras disguised as security lights. The new artwork on the windows contained reflective elements that made it difficult to see inside while providing perfect visibility for those within. The morning's baking had filled the street with warm, inviting smells, a psychological tactic suggested by Sarah herself. John moved to Tom's office, where they had a clear view of the bakery through a carefully positioned mirror. They watched as Monroe's men approached the shop, their body language showing increasing frustration. The storm had soaked them thoroughly, diminishing their intimidating appearance. Sarah met them at the door with professional courtesy, backed by the subtle presence of several customers, actually town residents positioned according to their strategic plan. Every movement, every word had been rehearsed, creating an atmosphere of normality that gave the intruders no opening for their usual tactics. The radio network continued to provide updates from around town. The third SUV was finding similar resistance on Cedar Street, where the residents had turned the storm to their advantage, creating a series of natural obstacles that made threatening behavior difficult without appearing to be organized resistance. As the morning wore on, it became clear that their strategy was working. Monroe's men were being worn down not by direct opposition, but by the persistent, maddening inability to establish control. Every attempt to intimidate was met with polite indifference or thwarted by seemingly natural circumstances. John allowed himself a small smile as he watched another frustrated attempt by Monroe's men to establish their presence fail in the face of the town's coordinated response. The storm had reached its full intensity now, turning Pine Hollow's streets into streams and making any show of force virtually impossible. But he knew better than to celebrate too early. This was only the first test of their resistance. Monroe and his men would regroup, analyze what had happened, and try new tactics. The real challenge would be maintaining their unity and resolve in the face of escalating pressure. Tom approached with another cup of coffee, his expression thoughtful. "They're not used to this kind of resistance," he observed. No violence to respond to, no clear target to intimidate. Just a town going about its business despite their best efforts to disrupt it. John nodded, his mind already working on the next phase of their strategy. That's what makes it effective. They're used to dealing with fear and submission. When they don't get either, it throws them off balance. The radio crackled one final time as Billy reported that the SUVs were regrouping at the Pine Valley Inn. The first round had gone to Pine Hollow, but the war was far from over. John knew that Monroe would not take this setback lightly. The next few days would test everything they had prepared for. As the storm continued to rage outside, John gathered his core team for a debriefing. They had scored an important victory, but it was just the beginning. The real challenge would be maintaining their resolve and unity in the face of whatever came next. The storm would pass, but the threat to their way of life remained. Pine Hollow had shown its strength today, but the true test of their determination was yet to come. The storm had passed, leaving Pine Hollow draped in a thick morning mist that clung to the mountains like a protective shroud. 3 days had passed since their first successful stand against Monroe's intimidation tactics, and the town had settled into a cautious rhythm of vigilance and preparation. John Hargrove stood on the ridge overlooking the town, Rex alert at his side, watching the sun struggle to pierce through the dense fog. From his vantage point, he could see the subtle signs of the town's transformation. The comfortable routines of small-town life continued on the surface, but underneath lay a complex network of coordination and support that grew stronger with each passing day. The morning deliveries to Sarah's bakery now included coded messages hidden among the inventory lists. Tom's garage had become a hub of activity, with vehicles strategically positioned to monitor key areas while appearing to await repair. The radio at his hip crackled to life. "John." It was Billy Chen's voice, tense but controlled. "We've got movement at the Pine Valley Inn. Different vehicles this time. Black sedans, tinted windows. Looks like Monroe's brought in reinforcements." John's jaw tightened slightly. He had anticipated this escalation, but the reality of it still sent a ripple of concern through him. Numbers. 4 cars. At least 12 people, well-dressed. These aren't the same type as before. Billy's voice dropped lower. "They look professional." "Understood. Implement Protocol Delta. All sectors on high alert." John turned to Rex, noting how the German shepherd's ears had pricked forward, sensing the tension in his master's voice. "Let's go, boy. We've got work to do." As they made their way down the ridge, John's mind worked through the implications of this new development. Monroe was adapting, just as expected. Instead of brute force, he was opting for a more sophisticated approach. The well-dressed professionals likely meant lawyers, accountants, and corporate strong-arm tactics, threats that couldn't be deflected with simple community coordination. The town's main street was already showing signs of responding to the alert. Shop owners casually adjusted their window displays, positioning their emergency signals. The teenage lookouts had switched to their school uniforms, blending in with the morning rush while maintaining their surveillance positions. Every movement was purposeful but natural, a choreographed dance of resistance that appeared entirely ordinary to outside observers. Sarah Thompson met John at the bakery's side entrance, her face tight with concern. "They're targeting businesses differently this time," she whispered, leading him inside. Two men in suits visited Henderson's Hardware an hour ago. They weren't making threats, they were making offers. Below-market buyout proposals, backed by hints about upcoming regulatory inspections. John nodded grimly. Monroe's showing his real strategy now. He's not just after protection money, he wants control of the town itself. He moved to the bakery's front window, watching as one of the black sedans glided past. How did Henderson respond? Exactly as we planned. Told them he'd need to consult with his business association, the one we created yesterday. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They couldn't push too hard without revealing their real intentions. The bell above the bakery door chimed, and Tom Wilson entered, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag. His casual demeanor masked the urgency in his eyes. "They're hitting every business on Main Street," he reported quietly, "offering to invest in the community. But there's a pattern to their visits." John studied the town map they had hidden beneath the bakery's daily specials board. Tom pointed out the sequence of visits, and a pattern emerged. They were systematically targeting the businesses that formed key points in the town's communication network, though they couldn't possibly know the significance of these locations. "They've done their homework," John mused, his tactical mind analyzing the situation. "They're trying to gain control of strategic properties without revealing their true purpose." He turned to Sarah and Tom. "Time to implement the second phase of our economic defense." The plan they had developed was as complex as it was subtle. Every business owner in Pine Hollow had spent the past 3 days establishing new corporate structures, creating a web of interdependent local ownership that would make outside takeover attempts extraordinarily difficult. The town's retired judge had worked through the nights, ensuring every document was legally sound. John's radio crackled again. "Mr. Hargrove." It was Emma Watson from the diner. Two of them just came in. "They're asking questions about property values and development plans. But there's something else. They're taking photos of the building's infrastructure, focusing on the back areas and utility connections." "Keep them engaged," John replied. "Protocol Echo is in effect." He turned to Tom. "Get the utility documentation ready. They'll be checking the town's infrastructure records next." Tom nodded and hurried out, maintaining his casual mechanic's demeanor even as he began the next phase of their counter-strategy. The town's utility maps had been carefully modified over the past few days, not falsified, but updated to show a complex web of easements and shared access rights that would make any attempted corporate takeover a legal nightmare. Throughout the morning, John moved through the town, coordinating responses and gathering intelligence. Rex stayed close, his presence both a comfort to the townspeople and a subtle reminder of their preparedness. The German Shepherd's military training showed in his alert but calm demeanor, matching his master's composed exterior. At the community center, Billy Chun had transformed the computer lab into a command center, monitoring social media and local news for any sign of Monroe's larger strategy. The young man's tech skills had proven invaluable, allowing them to stay one step ahead of their opponent's digital surveillance. "They're searching property records," Billy reported, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Looking for liens, easements, anything they can use for leverage. But they're finding our new ownership structure instead. Every search leads them deeper into our legal maze." John watched the screens, seeing the frustration build in their opponent's digital footprints. Monroe's team was discovering that Pine Hollow was far more sophisticated than they had anticipated. Every attempt to find a weak point in the town's business community led them instead to another layer of local protection. Sarah arrived with fresh coffee and an update from the business district. "They're starting to show signs of frustration," she reported. "The suits are making phone calls, arguing with someone. I heard one of them say something about unexpected complications. Good, John replied, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. The more time they spend trying to understand our defenses, the less time they have to develop new attacks. He turned to Billy. Status of protocol, Echo. All systems running as planned. Every inquiry they make triggers another layer of protection. The town's legal structure is like a self-defending maze now. Billy's young face showed pride in their accomplishment. Judge Harrison's work is holding up perfectly. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing a town that appeared to be going about its normal business. Children walked to school, elderly couples strolled the sidewalks, and shopkeepers chatted with customers. But beneath this peaceful surface, an intricate battle was being waged, one of paperwork, property rights, and community solidarity. John's radio buzzed with updates throughout the day. Monroe's professional team was encountering resistance at every turn, but unlike their predecessors, they were smart enough to recognize the coordination behind the town's responses. Their frustration was evident in their increasingly aggressive document requests and not-so-subtle hints about future difficulties for uncooperative businesses. By late afternoon, the black sedans had regrouped at the Pine Valley Inn. Through their surveillance network, John and his team watched as Monroe met with his new operators, their body language showing clear agitation. The professional facade was cracking, revealing the same underlying threat that had failed before. "They'll try something else soon," John told his core team as they gathered for an evening briefing at Tom's garage. "This setback will push them toward more desperate measures. We need to be ready." Sarah voiced the concern they all shared. "How long can we keep this up, John? They have resources, connections. We're just a small town." "That's where you're wrong," John replied, his voice firm with conviction. "We're not just a small town. We're a community that's chosen to stand together. That makes us stronger than any outside force, no matter how well-funded or connected they might be." He moved to the town map, now marked with the day's interactions and intelligence. They're learning that money and threats aren't enough to break a united community. But that realization will make them dangerous. They'll look for weak points, try to divide us. That's when our real strength will be tested. The team spent the next hour refining their plans, adapting their strategies based on what they'd learned about their opponent's methods. Every business owner had a role to play, every resident a part in the town's defense. The complexity of their response had grown, but so had their confidence and coordination. As the meeting concluded, John remained behind with Rex, studying the map and considering their next moves. The fog had returned with the evening, wrapping the town in its protective embrace. But he knew that somewhere in the Pine Valley Inn, Monroe and his team were planning their next attack. The radio crackled one final time for the day. "John." It was Billy Chun. "I found something in their digital traffic. They're planning something big. Something about bringing in outside investors for a major development project." "Copy that," John replied, his mind already working through the implications. "Get everyone ready for tomorrow. Phase 4 begins at dawn." As he and Rex walked home through the misty evening, John reflected on how far they'd come. Pine Hollow had transformed from a vulnerable target into a united fortress, not through weapons or violence, but through the strength of community and careful strategy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them together, just as they had faced everything else. The fog thickened around them, a natural ally in their ongoing resistance. Somewhere in the darkness, Monroe and his team were plotting their next move, unaware that every attack only strengthened the bonds that held Pine Hollow together. The real battle was just beginning, but John had never felt more confident in their ability to protect what mattered most: their home, their community, and their way of life. The next morning arrived with an unsettling calm. Pine Hollow lay wrapped in the golden light of dawn, its streets still wet from overnight rain. John Hargrove stood at his usual post by the kitchen window, but today his coffee had grown cold, untouched. Rex paced restlessly at his feet, picking up on his master's tension. The morning's intelligence briefing had brought troubling news. Monroe's team had been busy overnight, making calls to key figures in the surrounding communities. They were spreading carefully crafted rumors about Pine Hollow's resistance, painting the town's unity as a conspiracy against progress and economic development. John's radio came to life with Billy Chen's urgent voice. "They're moving earlier than expected. Multiple teams heading into town. But something's different. They're carrying documents, lots of them. And they're not just targeting businesses anymore. Before John could respond, another voice cut in, Sarah Thompson, her usual calm replaced by concern. John, you need to see this. They're distributing some kind of information packet to every house in town. It looks official. On my way, John replied, already moving toward the door. Rex fell in step beside him, the German Shepherd's powerful frame tense with alertness. As they made their way down Main Street, John could see Monroe's new strategy unfolding. Men in business attire were methodically working their way through the residential areas, leaving thick envelopes at every door. Through the town surveillance network, John watched as residents retrieved the packages, their faces showing increasing confusion and concern as they read the contents. At the bakery, Sarah had already collected one of the packets. She handed it to John with trembling hands. They've done their research, John. Really done it. The envelope contained a masterfully crafted presentation of Pine Hollow's supposed economic decline. Graphs showed projected job losses, property devaluation, and increasing tax burdens. Historical data had been carefully manipulated to suggest that the town's independence was actually a symptom of economic isolation and failed leadership. But the most damaging elements were the personal details. Each packet had been customized for its recipient, highlighting specific vulnerabilities. Business owners received projections of their competitors' advantages under Monroe's proposed development plan. Homeowners found detailed analyses of their property values compared to neighboring towns that had accepted similar development projects. They're trying to turn us against each other, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with anger, making everyone question everything we've built. John studied the documents with growing concern. This was psychological warfare at its most sophisticated. Monroe's team had tapped into every insecurity, every economic pressure point that existed in their small community. They were offering solutions to problems that suddenly seemed much more immediate and personal. The radio crackled with increasing frequency as reports came in from around town. The Henderson family was arguing publicly in their hardware store, their usual unity cracking under the weight of different opinions about the development proposals. The local Teachers Association was split over promises of increased education funding. Even the teenagers who had served as their lookouts were questioning their role, swayed by glossy brochures showing planned entertainment centers and job opportunities. John gathered his core team at Tom's garage, now their primary command center. The atmosphere was tense, the usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Tom himself looked troubled, his normally steady hands fidgeting with a wrench as he spoke. They're hitting us where it hurts, John. Everyone's talking about the numbers, the projections. People are starting to wonder if we're fighting progress instead of protecting our town. Billy Chun arrived with his laptop, his young face showing the strain of overnight monitoring. It's worse online. They've launched a sophisticated social media campaign. Local news outlets are picking up the story, but it's all from their angle. We're being painted as obstinate, anti-development, stuck in the past. John listened to each report, his tactical mind analyzing the situation. This was a far more dangerous attack than their previous attempts at intimidation. Monroe had found their weak point, the natural tensions and economic anxieties that existed in any small community. They're trying to divide us, John said finally, his voice cutting through the worried murmurs. Make us question not just our resistance, but our whole way of life. But they've made one crucial mistake. He moved to the town map, now marked with the distribution patterns of Monroe's information packets. Look at how they're targeting us. Every pressure point, every division they're trying to create, it's based on the assumption that we're just individuals looking out for our own interests. Sarah caught his meaning first, her face brightening with understanding. But we're not. We're a community. Everything we've built here, all our preparations, they're about more than just property values and economic projections. Exactly. John turned to face his team. They're using sophisticated tactics, but they're still thinking like outsiders. They see Pine Hollow as a collection of separate interests that can be divided and conquered. We need to remind everyone what we're really fighting for. The plan came together quickly, drawing on the strength that had sustained them so far, their unity. But this time, they needed to make that unity visible, tangible in a way that would counter Monroe's psychological warfare. First, they activated the town's emergency phone tree, but not to spread warnings or coordinates. Instead, each person was asked to share a story, a personal memory of how Pine Hollow's community had supported them in times of need. The narratives began to flow, creating a tapestry of shared experiences that no economic projection could quantify. Sarah opened her bakery's kitchen to the public, turning it into a gathering place where neighbors could discuss their concerns openly while working together to prepare the day's bread. The simple act of creating food together became a powerful reminder of their interdependence. Tom Wilson converted his garage's waiting room into a temporary museum, displaying photographs and artifacts that told the story of Pine Hollow's history. Each image showed moments of community triumph over adversity, reminding everyone that their current struggle was part of a longer legacy of unity and resilience. The teenagers who had served as lookouts took on a new role, using their social media skills to counter Monroe's online narrative. But instead of arguing with statistics, they shared real stories of life in Pine Hollow, the local traditions, the mutual support, the countless small acts of kindness that made their town special. Billy Chun worked through the day, creating a digital archive of the town's records that told a very different story from Monroe's carefully crafted narrative. His presentation showed how Pine Hollow's independence had actually fostered innovation and sustainable growth, preserving their way of life while adapting to changing times. John moved through the town, Rex at his side, visiting each gathering point and listening to the conversations. He could see the tide beginning to turn as people shared their stories and remembered why they had chosen to stand together in the first place. The Henderson family's public argument transformed into a passionate discussion about their hardware store's role in the community, how it had supported local builders and homeowners through good times and bad. Their unified front returned, stronger for having faced and overcome their doubts together. By late afternoon, the mood in Pine Hollow had shifted. Monroe's information packets still sat on doorsteps and desks, but their power had diminished. The economic projections and carefully crafted warnings now seemed hollow compared to the real stories of community life that filled the air. John received updates throughout the day, each one showing the same pattern. Where Monroe's team had tried to create division, they had instead sparked conversations that reinforced the town's bonds. Every attempt to highlight individual vulnerabilities had led to demonstrations of collective strength. As evening approached, John gathered his team for their daily briefing. The tension from the morning had been replaced by a quiet confidence. Sarah brought fresh bread, still warm from the day's community baking. Tom's hands were steady again as he outlined the next day's preparations. "They'll try something else," John warned, always the tactician. "This setback will push them to more desperate measures. But today has shown us something important. Our strength isn't in our plans or preparations. It's in our connections to each other." The radio buzzed with Billy's voice. "Movement at the Pine Valley Inn. Looks like they're regrouping, bringing in new people. Different type this time, marketing experts, maybe public relations professionals." John nodded, unsurprised. "They'll try to reframe the narrative, find new angles of attack. But now they're fighting against something they don't understand, the real power of community." As the meeting concluded, John and Rex made their usual evening patrol. The streets were alive with activity, neighbors visiting neighbors, sharing meals and stories. Monroe's attempt to divide them had instead reminded them of what made Pine Hollow special. The sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the town. In the Pine Valley Inn, Monroe and his team were undoubtedly planning their next move. But they were fighting against something stronger than economic projections or development plans, the unbreakable bonds of a community that had chosen to stand together, no matter what came next. John paused at the ridge overlooking the town, watching the lights come on in homes and businesses. Each light represented a family, a story, a piece of the community that had grown stronger through adversity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Pine Hollow would face them the same way they had faced everything else, together. The autumn morning brought with it an unexpected visitor to Pine Hollow. John Hargrove was reviewing the night surveillance reports when Billy Chun burst into the command center, his young face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Hargrove, you need to see this. Someone from Monroe's past is here, and they're carrying documents that could change everything." The visitor was Claire Richardson, a former executive from Monroe's organization who had arrived under the cover of dawn. She had requested a meeting with John specifically, citing information that could expose Monroe's true intentions for Pine Hollow. John studied the security footage from the town's entrance, watching as Claire's modest sedan made its way toward the community center. Rex, ever vigilant, stood at attention, his ears forward as if sensing the significance of this development. "Verify her credentials," John instructed Billy, his tactical mind already analyzing potential scenarios. And get Sarah and Tom here immediately. We need the core team for this. Within 30 minutes, the leadership group had assembled. Claire Richardson sat before them, her professional demeanor masking obvious nervousness. She placed a thick folder on the table, her hands trembling slightly. "What I'm about to show you," she began, her voice steady despite her apparent anxiety, "proves that Pine Hollow isn't just another acquisition target for Monroe. This town sits on something he's been searching for across 3 states." The documents she revealed told a story that stretched back decades. Geological surveys, water rights documents, and mineral reports painted a picture that made Pine Hollow's strategic value suddenly clear. Beneath the town's peaceful surface lay an aquifer of extraordinary purity, fed by an underground river system that could supply water to half the state. Monroe discovered this through private surveys conducted last year, Claire explained, spreading maps across the table. But what makes it truly valuable is its position. Pine Hollow sits at the perfect junction point for his planned water distribution network. He's been buying up water rights across the region, preparing for the drought conditions that climate scientists predict will hit this area within the next decade. Sarah Thompson leaned forward, her baker's hands gripping the edge of the table. "So all this, the intimidation, the development proposals, the psychological warfare, it's all been about water?" "Water is just the beginning," Claire continued, pulling out more documents. "The development plan you've been fighting isn't just about controlling the town. It's about controlling the entire region's water supply. Monroe plans to create a monopoly, and Pine Hollow is the keystone." John absorbed this information with growing concern. The stakes had suddenly grown far beyond their small town's independence. They were now standing in the way of a scheme that could affect thousands of lives across the state. "Why are you sharing this with us?" Tom Wilson asked, his mechanic's practicality cutting to the heart of the matter. Claire's professional facade cracked slightly, showing genuine emotion. "Because I've seen what happens to communities that fall under Monroe's control. The promises of development and prosperity always end the same way, with resources stripped, lives disrupted, and communities destroyed. Pine Hollow's resistance. It's the first time I've seen anyone stand up to him effectively." John paced the room, Rex following his movements with attentive eyes. This revelation changed everything, and nothing. Their strategy of unity and peaceful resistance had been working, but now they understood the true scale of what they were fighting against. "We need to share this with the town," Sarah suggested, but John held up his hand. "Carefully," he cautioned. "This information is powerful, but it could also be dangerous. If we don't handle it right, it could create panic or make people feel hopeless against such a large-scale threat." The team spent the next hours developing a plan to use this new information effectively. They needed to inform the community while maintaining the spirit of unified resistance that had served them so well. Billy Chen's technological expertise proved invaluable once again. He began creating a secure digital archive of Claire's documents, ensuring that the evidence would be preserved and accessible when needed. "We can use this to counter their narrative," he explained. "Show people the real story behind their development promises." Throughout the day, John coordinated a series of small group meetings at various locations around town. The bakery, the garage, and the community center became briefing points where trusted community leaders could learn the truth about Monroe's plans and help prepare their neighbors for the next phase of resistance. The revelation had an unexpected effect on the town's morale. Instead of causing fear or resignation, the knowledge that they were fighting for something larger than themselves strengthened their resolve. Pine Hollow wasn't just protecting their way of life anymore. They were standing against a threat to the entire region's future. Sarah's bakery became a hub of activity as people processed the news. "It's like we've been playing chess without seeing the whole board," she remarked to John as they watched neighbors discussing the revelation over fresh coffee and bread. "But now we can see what we're really fighting for." Tom Wilson's practical nature found expression in immediate action. He began organizing teams to document and protect the town's water infrastructure, ensuring that Monroe's people couldn't gain control through technical means. "If water is what they want," he declared, "then water is what we'll defend." Claire Richardson proved to be an invaluable ally, her inside knowledge helping them understand and anticipate Monroe's likely next moves. "He'll try to rush things now," she warned during an evening strategy session. "Once he realizes I'm here, he'll know his long-term plans are exposed. He'll push for a quick resolution, try to force a confrontation." John incorporated this intelligence into their defensive preparations. The town's network of lookouts was reinforced, with special attention paid to the water treatment plant and other critical infrastructure. Rex's patrols with the volunteer security teams took on new significance as they worked to protect not just the town, but its precious natural resources. As night fell, John stood with Claire at the ridge overlooking Pine Hollow. The town's lights twinkled below, each one representing a family that was now part of something much larger than their local struggle. "You've built something remarkable here," Claire observed. "In all my years working in corporate development, I've never seen a community come together like this." John watched as Rex patrolled the perimeter, the German Shepherd's movements precise and purposeful. "Pine Hollow is special," he agreed. "But what we're doing here, standing together, protecting what matters, that's something any community can do if they choose to." The radio crackled with Billy's voice, interrupting their conversation. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south, Mr. Hargrove. Looks like Monroe himself this time. He's bringing everyone." John nodded, unsurprised. The revelation of their precious resource had forced Monroe's hand, just as Claire had predicted. "Alert all sectors," he instructed. "Implement Protocol Omega. It's time to show them what Pine Hollow really stands for." Throughout the town, lights began to come on as the alert spread. But there was no panic, no rush to close doors or hide. Instead, people emerged from their homes, gathering in small groups, ready to face whatever came next. The unity they had built over the past days would now face its greatest test. Sarah's voice came over the radio, calm and determined. "The bakery network is ready. Everyone knows their roles." Tom added his confirmation. "Garage teams in position. All access points covered." One by one, each sector of their community reported in, a symphony of cooperation that had grown from their shared trial. Claire listened to the reports with growing amazement. "I've never heard anything like this," she whispered. "Every person knowing exactly what to do, working together without fear." John smiled slightly. That's what Monroe never understood. He sees a small town, limited resources, people who can be divided and conquered. But we're not just defending property or resources anymore. We're defending the idea that a community can stand together against any threat, no matter how large. The approaching vehicles were now visible on the main road, their headlights cutting through the evening mist. But Pine Hollow was ready. The revelation of Monroe's true plans hadn't weakened them. It had given their resistance new purpose and meaning. As John made his final preparations, Rex at his side, he knew that tomorrow would bring their greatest challenge yet. But he also knew that Pine Hollow would face it the same way they had faced everything else, as a united community, standing together for something larger than themselves. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of their town, but the future of the entire region. Pine Hollow's lights continued to shine in the gathering darkness, each one a beacon of resistance against those who would exploit their community for profit. The revelation had changed the stakes of their struggle, but it hadn't changed their hearts. If anything, it had strengthened their resolve to protect not just their own way of life, but the well-being of countless others who would be affected by Monroe's schemes. As the night deepened and Monroe's convoy drew closer, John and his team made their final preparations. Tomorrow would test everything they had built together, their unity, their strategy, and their commitment to peaceful resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. But Pine Hollow was ready, their spirit unbroken, their community stronger than ever. Dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and rose as Pine Hollow prepared for its most significant challenge. John Hargrove stood at the town square center, Rex vigilant beside him, watching as the community implemented their most ambitious strategy yet. The revelation about the aquifer had transformed their resistance from a local struggle into something far more meaningful, a stand against corporate exploitation that could affect the entire region. Monroe's convoy had arrived at the Pine Valley in under cover of darkness, bringing with them an impressive array of corporate resources. Lawyers, executives, and public relations specialists filled the hotel's conference rooms, their preparations evident in the constant flow of activity. Through their surveillance network, John and his team monitored the gathering storm. "They've brought in state-level officials," Billy Chun reported from his command station at the community center. "3 government vehicles just arrived. Looks like Monroe's calling in every favor he has." John absorbed this information with characteristic calm. They had anticipated this escalation and prepared accordingly. "Implement Phase 1, he instructed through the radio network. All sectors coordinate as planned. Throughout Pine Hollow, the community's response began with practiced precision. Sarah Thompson's bakery, usually filled with the aroma of fresh bread, now served as the headquarters for their media response team. Local journalists who had been carefully briefed on the aquifer situation were arriving, greeted by prepared statements and comprehensive documentation of Monroe's true intentions. Tom Wilson's garage had been transformed into a command center for their infrastructure defense. Teams of residents monitored key access points to the town's water system, not with weapons or barricades, but with cameras and legal observers. Every attempt to approach these critical areas would be documented and witnessed. At precisely 8 o'clock, Monroe made his move. A delegation of suits and officials emerged from the Pine Valley Inn, led by a man whose confident stride and expensive attire marked him as the architect of their community's troubles. Jack Monroe cut an imposing figure, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and success. As the delegation approached the town hall, they found themselves walking into a carefully orchestrated demonstration of community solidarity. Every business along Main Street was open, operating normally, their windows displaying signs that read "Pine Hollow, protecting our future." Residents went about their daily routines, but each person wore a blue ribbon, the color of clean water, of their precious aquifer. John stepped forward to meet Monroe's delegation, Rex at his side. The German Shepherd's presence was both a symbol of protection and a reminder of the military precision with which Pine Hollow had organized its defense. "Mr. Monroe," John greeted him, his voice carrying across the now quiet square. "Pine Hollow welcomes you to an open discussion about our community's future." Monroe's practiced smile flickered slightly. This wasn't the confrontation he had expected. Instead of angry protesters or fearful residents, he faced a community operating with calm determination. "Mr. Hargrove," Monroe responded, his tone professionally cordial, "I believe we have matters to discuss that affect the economic development of this entire region." "Indeed we do," John agreed, "particularly regarding the aquifer you've been so interested in." The mention of the aquifer caused visible tension among Monroe's entourage. Claire Richardson had been right. They hadn't expected their true motives to be exposed so directly. John gestured toward the community center, where their own meeting space had been prepared. "We've arranged for a public forum. Representatives from state water conservation agencies are already inside, along with environmental scientists and members of neighboring communities who would be affected by your proposed water distribution network." Monroe's confidence wavered visibly. The presence of regulatory officials and scientific experts hadn't been part of his planned power play. His gaze swept the gathered crowd, noting the cameras documenting every moment the peaceful but determined faces of Pine Hollow's residents. Inside the community center, the true scope of Pine Hollow's preparation became clear. Displays showed detailed geological surveys of the aquifer system, environmental impact studies, and projections of how Monroe's proposed water monopoly would affect regional agriculture and development. Billy Chun managed the technical presentation, displaying document after document on large screens. Property records, water rights agreements, and corporate filings created a damning picture of Monroe's long-term strategy. Claire Richardson's insider knowledge had allowed them to expose the entire scheme. "As you can see," John addressed the assembled officials and media representatives, "this isn't just about Pine Hollow. Mr. Monroe's organization has been systematically acquiring water rights across 3 states, positioning themselves to control access to critical resources during predicted drought conditions." Sarah Thompson stood to present the community's alternative proposal. Over the past day, Pine Hollow had worked with environmental experts and legal advisors to develop a plan for protecting the aquifer through a community trust, ensuring sustainable access for the entire region. Monroe attempted to regain control of the narrative, his corporate instincts kicking in. These are complex economic issues that require experienced management and significant capital investment. A small town simply doesn't have the resources. "We have something more valuable than capital, Mr. Monroe," John interrupted calmly. "We have community integrity and public trust. Resources that once lost, no amount of money can restore." Throughout the day, the meeting continued as Pine Hollow presented its case. Each resident who spoke demonstrated the deep understanding and commitment that had grown from their struggle. They weren't just defending their town anymore, they were protecting a vital resource for future generations. Monroe's team tried various tactics: legal threats, economic warnings, promises of compromise. But each attempt met with the same calm, organized resistance. Pine Hollow had transformed from an isolated target into the center of a regional environmental and social justice movement. By late afternoon, the tide had clearly turned. State officials, confronted with clear evidence of attempted resource monopolization, began distancing themselves from Monroe's proposals. Environmental agencies expressed strong interest in Pine Hollow's community trust model. Media coverage highlighted the town's innovative approach to resource protection. As the sun began to set, Monroe's delegation retreated to the Pine Valley Inn, their carefully planned takeover in shambles. John gathered his core team for an evening briefing, knowing that while they had won this battle, the war wasn't over. "They'll try other angles," Claire warned, her insider's knowledge still proving invaluable. "Monroe doesn't give up easily, especially not with something this valuable at stake." John nodded, studying the town map with its marked defensive positions. "We'll be ready. Pine Hollow understands now that we're not just protecting our town, we're standing up for something that affects everyone." Sarah Thompson brought fresh coffee to the team, her baker's hand steady as she poured. "The other communities are standing with us now. 3 neighboring towns have already requested copies of our trust proposal." Tom Wilson added his practical perspective, "And our infrastructure monitoring system has become a model for other communities concerned about resource protection. We're stronger together than any of us could be alone." As night fell over Pine Hollow, John and Rex made their final patrol. The town felt different now, not just unified, but purposeful. They had faced corporate power and political pressure with something stronger than money or influence: the power of an informed, organized community working together for the common good. The lights of the Pine Valley Inn still burned late into the night as Monroe and his team tried to salvage their plans. But Pine Hollow's residents slept peacefully, knowing they had chosen to stand for something larger than themselves. Their resistance had evolved into a movement that would inspire other communities facing similar challenges. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Pine Hollow was ready. They had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in their resources or strategic position, but in their commitment to protecting what mattered most, not just for themselves, but for all who would come after them. As John and Rex turned toward home, the autumn stars emerged above the mountain peaks. Somewhere in the depths beneath their feet, the precious aquifer continued its ancient flow, now protected by a community that had found its true purpose in standing together against those who would exploit it for profit. The day's events had demonstrated something powerful: that when a community unites with clear purpose and peaceful determination, it can stand successfully against even the most formidable opponents. Pine Hollow had not just protected its independence, it had shown a way forward for others who would face similar challenges in the future. 6 months had passed since Pine Hollow's historic stand against corporate exploitation. The Montana winter had come and gone, leaving behind a landscape renewed by spring's gentle touch. John Hargrove stood at his familiar post on the ridge overlooking the town, Rex faithful as ever at his side, watching the morning sun illuminate a community transformed by its journey. The Pine Valley Inn, once Monroe's headquarters, had been converted into an environmental research center, where scientists studied the aquifer system that had sparked their conflict. The facility now served as a model for sustainable water management, drawing visitors from across the country who sought to learn from Pine Hollow's example. Sarah Thompson's bakery had expanded, adding a community meeting space where residents gathered to discuss local initiatives and share ideas. The walls displayed photographs documenting their resistance, not as a reminder of conflict, but as a testament to what people could achieve when they stood together. The latest water quality reports just came in, Billy Chen announced, approaching with his ever-present laptop. Now the head of Pine Hollow's new environmental monitoring program, the young man had grown into a respected leader in his own right. The aquifer protection measures are working better than expected. 3 more counties have adopted our management model. John nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. The community trust they had established to protect the aquifer had become a blueprint for other towns facing similar challenges. Their victory had sparked a movement that stretched far beyond Montana's borders. At Tom Wilson's garage, now a hub for sustainable infrastructure innovation, a group of visiting engineers examined the monitoring systems that had helped defend their water supply. Tom himself had become an unexpected ambassador for community-based resource protection, traveling to share their experience with other threatened communities. "It's not just about the technology," John overheard him explaining to the visitors. "It's about building trust, creating systems that serve everyone's needs." Pine Hollow showed that a small town can lead the way in protecting vital resources for future generations. Claire Richardson, who had risked everything to expose Monroe's plans, had found a new home in Pine Hollow. Her corporate expertise now served the community trust, helping other towns navigate the complex legal and economic challenges of protecting their resources. Her office in the converted community center had become a clearinghouse for information about corporate water acquisition attempts across the country. "We've received requests for assistance from 17 communities this month alone," she reported during the morning's briefing. "Each one facing similar pressures to what we encountered. But now they have a roadmap for resistance, thanks to what Pine Hollow accomplished." The town itself had flourished in unexpected ways. Their stance against corporate exploitation had attracted environmentally conscious businesses and residents who shared their values. New shops lined Main Street, each one committed to sustainable practices and community involvement. The local school had added an environmental science program, preparing the next generation to be stewards of their precious resources. John made his way down to the town square, where preparations were underway for the first annual Pine Hollow Environmental Leadership Conference. Representatives from communities across the country would gather to learn about protecting their resources through unity and peaceful resistance. The event symbolized how their local struggle had grown into a national movement. Sarah greeted him with fresh coffee, her bakery now a celebrated symbol of community resilience. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed," she reflected, watching people set up displays about sustainable water management and community organizing. "Remember when we thought we were just protecting our small town? We were protecting something bigger than we knew," John replied, sharing a knowing look with Rex. "We were defending the idea that communities have the right and the power to determine their own futures." The German Shepherd's ears perked up as a school group passed by, the children wearing blue ribbons that had become a symbol of water protection efforts across the region. They were part of a new generation growing up understanding the importance of community action and environmental stewardship. Tom Wilson joined them, wiping his hands on his ever-present shop rag. "Just got word that the state legislature passed the Community Resource Protection Act. They're using our trust model as the framework. Pine Hollow's going to be mentioned by name in the legislation. The law would make it harder for corporations to monopolize natural resources, requiring community input and environmental impact studies before any major water rights transfers could be approved." It was a tangible result of their resistance, proof that a small town could influence policy at the highest levels. As the morning progressed, John walked through the town that had become a symbol of hope for communities everywhere. The hardware store, where the Henderson family had once argued over Monroe's proposals, now specialized in sustainable building supplies. The teenage lookouts who had helped monitor Monroe's movements had formed an environmental youth council, inspiring their peers to engage in community activism. At the community center, Billy Chun was conducting a workshop on information security for visiting community organizers. "Knowledge is power," he explained, echoing the lesson they had learned during their struggle. When communities share information and strategies, corporate interests lose their advantage. Claire Richardson's afternoon presentation focused on identifying and countering corporate acquisition strategies. "What happened in Pine Hollow wasn't unique," she told the gathered audience. "What was unique was how the community responded, with unity, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to protecting their resources for future generations." As evening approached, John stood once again on the ridge, Rex beside him, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. The town below was filled with visitors, each one carrying a piece of Pine Hollow's story back to their own communities. Their resistance had created ripples that continued to spread, inspiring others to stand up for their rights and resources. The Environmental Research Center's lights glowed softly in the gathering dusk, a reminder of how defeat had been transformed into opportunity. Inside, scientists and community leaders worked together to ensure that vital resources would be protected and shared fairly, not exploited for corporate profit. Sarah's voice came over the radio, now used for coordinating community events rather than defensive measures. "Evening gathering is ready to start, John. People are asking for the story, the real story of how Pine Hollow found its strength." John smiled, knowing that their story had become more than just a tale of resistance. It was a blueprint for community action, a reminder that ordinary people working together could accomplish extraordinary things. Pine Hollow had shown that the strongest defense against corporate exploitation wasn't money or political influence, but the unshakable bonds of a united community. As he made his way down to join the gathering, John reflected on how their struggle had transformed not just Pine Hollow, but communities across the nation. They had proved that small towns could stand up to powerful interests and win, not through violence or confrontation, but through unity, strategy, and unwavering commitment to their principles. The evening celebration brought together people from all walks of life, united by their commitment to protecting vital resources for future generations. As John shared their story once again, he saw in the faces of their visitors the same determination that had helped Pine Hollow prevail. Their legacy would live on through every community that found the courage to stand together against exploitation, choosing to protect what mattered most for all who would follow. The stars emerged above the Montana mountains, their eternal light witnessing the continued evolution of a small town that had dared to stand against corporate power and won. Pine Hollow had become more than just a place. It was now a symbol of hope, a reminder that when communities united in purpose and principle, no force could overcome their collective strength. Dear viewers, we hope that Pine Hollow's journey has touched your hearts and inspired you to believe in the power of community unity. For more inspiring stories about communities standing together and making a difference, visit our channel's special playlist by clicking the link on your left. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the triumph of human spirit and community bonds. Join us in celebrating these remarkable tales of courage and unity. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story resonated with you.